All right, everyone. Welcome to the Mixpanel Implementation for Developers webinar. My name is Nima, and I'm a product trainer here at Mixpanel, and I'll be your host throughout this next hour or so, in which we'll be taking a fairly in-depth look at the Mixpanel implementation process. Now, in case you haven't heard this term before, implementation is the word that we use here at Mixpanel to refer to the process of adding tracking code within your product, right? So this is going to be a fairly technical process, which is why this webinar is intended for developers. So real quickly, before we jump into the actual good stuff, I just want to give you a bit of context in terms of the structure of this webinar. As soon as we're done wrapping up this quick intro, we're going to jump right into an implementation demo, which is going to be a majority of the time that we'll have together. Now, what I mean by implementation demo is that we're going to walk through from scratch an entire Mixpanel implementation, right? So we're going to be looking at, a fake website and seeing how we can add tracking into that website's code in order to, first we're going to look at tracking user actions, right? So that would be event tracking. We're also going to take a look at how do we make sure we track users, as they move around, right? So as they switch devices or browsers, we want to make sure that our events aren't just coming in as anonymous users, but that we're actually tracking our individual users. So that will be covered in a section on identity management. And finally, in our demo, we're going to look at how do we create user profiles within our Mixpanel project so that we can then later, maybe target our users with messages or campaigns. And then finally, once we're done with our demo, we'll wrap up with a quick Q&A session to answer any unanswered questions from the audience. So that's the structure right there, and we've got a lot of material to cover. So I'm going to actually go ahead and jump right into our demo. So quickly, let's go ahead and take a look at Music Finder, which is going to be our fake business or fake web app on which we'll be implementing Mixpanel. So as of right now, there is no tracking embedded within Music Finder. All right, so let's quickly just look at what our application is. It's simply kind of like Spotify, right? It's a site that you can go ahead and create an account. And here's asking for our favorite genre. So let's go ahead and select classical music. And once we sign up, we're presented with songs that we can then go ahead and play. And for copyright reasons, I don't actually have it play. It just shows a little pop-up saying that the song was played. Or you can go ahead and purchase songs. So very, very simple web application that we're dealing with. So we're going to take a look at how we can add Mixpanel into this website. Now, before we can go adding Mixpanel code into our product, the very first step with an implementation is to set up a Mixpanel project to which we can send this data that we'll be tracking. Right. So the process for creating a project is very simple. We just go ahead and log into our Mixpanel account. And from here, we can just click on this project drop-down menu in the upper left-hand corner. So I'll go ahead and create a brand new project, and we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this Music Finder. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a label called dev. Right? And this in no way is mandatory, but this is one of the best practices that we recommend when setting up implementations is to start off with a dev project. Right? That will be specific to your dev environment. The idea here is that we don't want our testing code to skew the data of our live, user data. Right? So eventually we're going to have our own live project. This is just a dev project that we're setting up temporarily so that we can test out our implementation. And then once everything's working as expected, we'll see how we can go ahead and create a brand new project to start sending our live data. All right, so let's go ahead and create this project. And as expected, Mixpanel is prompting us with this banner saying, hey, we haven't received any events from you yet. And of course, that's because we just set up our project. So let's go ahead and click on this prompt to set up now to see what Mixpanel recommends we should do next. And you can see that the first step is to install one of the Mixpanel libraries, which we actually have several different libraries to choose from, into our product. Right? So in our case, since we're dealing with a web application, I'm going to go ahead and use a JavaScript library because as we can see that this is the recommended library for tracking client-side events. So in order to install the JavaScript library, all we have to do is take this snippet, which has been provided for us right here, and paste it into the head section of each one of our HTML pages. All right, so I'm going to switch over to our actual source code here for our website, and simply inside of the head section of each of my web pages, I'll go ahead and paste this snippet exactly as is. So exactly from what I copied here in the Mixpanel UI. So let's go ahead and do that on all 4 of our web pages. And with that, I should have successfully installed Mixpanel into Music Finder. And just to show you that this is, so here's the actual, going back to our Music Finder site. If I were to refresh this page and now view the page source, sure enough, you can see that here's the Mixpanel snippet included right here. So we've added the library, but returning here to Mixpanel, if we check for data, we're going to see that, we still have not sent any data to our project, right? Now you may be thinking, oh, maybe that's just because we haven't done anything on Music Finder, right? So let's go ahead and jump back here and, for example, play a song, right? Or buy a song, right? These are actions that we're definitely going to want to track in Music Finder, in Mixpanel. But returning here to our project, we still see that's checking, but no data has come in, right? And this is a common, point of confusion that a lot of our first-time customers have is they think simply installing the Mixpanel library will automatically start sending data into their project, right? And this is actually not the case, right? So Mixpanel is actually built to be a custom analytics solution. And what I mean by custom is that it is up to you to decide what data you want to send to Mixpanel, right? So just installing the library isn't enough, right? That's just setting up the connection between your product and your Mixpanel project, right? Now the next step, which is going to be a majority of what we'll be covering here in the demo, is how do we actually add tracking code within our product so we can send data to our project, right? So here we can see that the next step is to, let's begin by tracking an event, right? So here they're showing you the syntax for tracking an event called video play. Now again, Mixpanel is a customizable analytics solution. So it's going to be up to us to decide what we want to name our events. So in the case of Music Finder, we're not playing videos, but we have song plays and we have song purchases, right? So those will be the event names that we'll use. But instead of me talking, let's go ahead and actually see this in action, right? So I'm going to switch back into our, into our code. And right here, let's begin with our sign-up page. Right, so here, one event that's going to be very important for us to track. Sorry about the jumping around. All right, here we go. One event that we're definitely going to want to track is, when a user views our sign-up page, right? Because this is really important for us to know how many new users are coming to our site, and what's the conversion rate of, let's say, users that view our sign-up page and then go on to sign up. So somehow we need to tell Mixpanel to track every time a user views this page. Now again, the syntax for tracking is just mixpanel.track and then the event name, right? Now in our code, this can go anywhere as long as it appears after the Mixpanel library has been loaded, right? So here in our signup page, we load our Mixpanel library, and let's go ahead and do it here at the end of our head section. I can now just start writing JavaScript using the Mixpanel library, right? So I can do something like mixpanel.track. And again, the event name is entirely up to us, right? Now you could call it whatever you want. Like I literally could just write a bunch of gibberish and it would still work. But best practice, of course, is to name your events using descriptive event names, right? So it should be clear, when you look at this event in your Mixpanel project, what user action corresponds to that event, right? So I'm going to call this event, let's call it sign up page view. And you end it with a semicolon. And now we should start seeing events coming into our project, right? So I've loaded the Mixpanel library, and I've now specified that I want Mixpanel to track our first event, right? So going back into our code here, let me reorder my desktops real quick so we don't keep jumping around. All right, here we go. So here in Music Finder, I'm going to go ahead and refresh our page, which if we view the source code now, we can see that it has our Mixpanel track call right there, which means that as soon as we loaded this page, we should have sent that event to Mixpanel. So let's go ahead and test that out. All right, so now I'm going to check to see if there's any data. And it's thinking, and let's keep our fingers crossed. There we go. Sure enough, it says you are successfully sending data. Now, while this check mark here is fairly reassuring, let's go ahead and actually look at that event to make sure that it's being sent as expected. So I'm going to switch over here to view your data. And once that loads, we should see, I believe, the segmentation report. So let's see. Yep, here we go. So by default, it's showing us the segmentation report, which is great at looking at events over time, right? So it's showing that, I had no events for all these days. Up until today, I finally got my first sign up page view event, and it has a count of 1 right now. Now, in terms of implementation, the report that we're going to want to be using as we're building out our implementation is definitely going to be live view. Right? So live view is going to be your best friend, as you're building out your implementation. And the reason why is because live view will literally show you every event as it comes into your project. So right here we can see, for example, we have this one sign up page view event. So that's the name of the event that came in 1 minute ago, right? And the reason why it's called live view is because it is literally a live view of your events. So if I were to jump back into our Music Finder site and let's just refresh the page, reloading that page right there should have sent another event into our Mixpanel project. And if I were to go back into my live view and refresh, sure enough, I didn't even have to refresh. It just populated right there. I can now see this second sign up page view event 11 seconds ago, right? So this is live view right here. It is great for digging into your events as they come into your project in real time. Now that we're in live view, I actually want to point out something else here. So here you'll notice that in our code, God, I need to figure this out. All right, sorry, let me reorder. Here we go. All right, so here in our code, all we specified in the track call was the event name, right? Nowhere did I specify the browser information or how to find where the user is located. Yet here in Mixpanel, all of a sudden I can see not only the event name, but all of these other properties, right? So properties is a term that we use here at Mixpanel to refer to kind of additional details that describe that particular action or event, right? So here, this property, for example, called browser, lets us know what browser was used to trigger this event. So in this case, it's indicating that sure enough, this was sent from Chrome. It gives you the browser version and a whole bunch of other information, right? You can see even stuff like screen resolution. You can see what Mixpanel library was used to track that event. All this is information that we did not explicitly send with our track call. However, inside of our Mixpanel project, we now have access to this information, right? So these properties are what we refer to as default properties, right? So default properties are properties that automatically get sent when you use one of the Mixpanel client-side libraries. So again, I want to clarify there that this is strictly for our client-side libraries, right? So when you're using a JavaScript library or Android library or iOS, you'll get a set of default properties that will automatically come with every event. Now, if you're interested in knowing what specific properties will get set with each individual library, go ahead and just navigate over to our Help Center. So if you go to Help, go ahead and zoom in right there for you. Yeah, help.mixpanel.com. You're going to find a lot of great resources, and you can go ahead and browse for help articles. So here I would, for example, search for, let's look for the article on default properties. And sure enough, you can see that here is an article that goes through for each library, right? So JavaScript, iOS, and Android, what are the default properties that you'll have access to? Right, so everything that we see here in our live view should be listed here in this article right here. Now, default properties, we're not going to have time to cover all the different reports because this section is just focused on implementation. But these really become useful once you start analyzing your data, right? Because then you can start, segmenting your data by different, properties. You can say, for example, show me all of my signups broken down by browser, right? And if you see all of a sudden there's a steep drop off in one browser, maybe that's an indication that your signup page doesn't look correct on that particular browser. So it does help you really dig into your data to have these default properties sent for you. All right, so now that we've got our first event tracking, let's go ahead and add track calls for our other events. So going back into our code, or actually one more thing, sorry. Before we do that, I want to highlight one other best practice, which is, as you're building out your Mixpanel implementation, you're going to start adding more and more events, right? And a lot of developers don't like adding a bunch of code directly into their web page's HTML, right? I personally like to keep everything clean and organized and separate, right? So another common practice is to create a separate JavaScript file to house your Mixpanel tracking code, right? So you keep it separate from your HTML, right? Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to actually build that out here. I've actually set it up already ahead of time. So you'll notice that inside of each one of our HTML pages, I've linked to a mixpanel.javascript file, which I can show you right here. Right? So all this JavaScript file does as of now is whenever a user performs a particular action inside of our web app, it will trigger one of these function calls. Right? So for example, when a user views the signup page, it will trigger this function that's called signup page viewed. But as of now, the body for every one of these functions is completely empty. So nothing actually happens. But what we're going to do is as we build out our implementation, we can simply add our Mixpanel code into this one mixpanel.javascript file. So keep it nice and clean and separate instead of scattered across all of our HTML pages. So let's go ahead and do that actually for our signup page view, right? So I'm going to just take this track call and remove it from my raw HTML right here, and instead pop it over into our signup page view function. So essentially what's going to happen now is whenever a user views the signup page, it will call this function right here, which is responsible for calling mixpanel.track signup page view. So before we go any further, let's just check to make sure that actually worked. So here, back in our music finder, I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page and jump back into, where are we? Where is our Mixpanel? Sorry. Let me pull up my Mixpanel project again. Here we go, musicfinder.dev. Again, back into our live view. There we go. We see that third signup page view event 20 seconds ago. So our tracking is still working, even though we've separated it now into a separate JavaScript file. So yeah, best practice there is just keep your actual source code clean by isolating your your Mixpanel code into a separate file. One additional benefit is not only does this keep things clean, but it makes it a lot easier down the road for you to modify your implementation. So let's say later on you need to change event names, or maybe you need to add some track calls. You know where to look, right? You can just jump straight into your Mixpanel JavaScript file and everything will be here in this one location. So right now it's looking pretty empty, but let's go ahead and continue on with our implementation so we can start filling out these other function calls. So like I said, since our first event is tracking, let's go ahead and add track calls actually for all of the other important user actions within our Music Finder app. So for example, when a user creates an account, we're gonna again want to track a call, make a Mixpanel.track call, and the only thing we're gonna change is the event name. Right? So in this case, when a user creates an account, let's track an event called, let's just call it sign up. Right? Again, you want to use descriptive event names that clearly indicate what action was just performed. When a user logs in, we'll track an event called login. When they play a song, let's track an event called song play. And when they purchase, similarly, we'll track an event called song purchase. One other best practice with event names is also stick with a consistent formatting, right? So you'll notice here I'm sticking with capitalizing every first letter in each word, right? So sign up, S is capitalized, P in page, and V in view is capitalized. This not only makes it cleaner to look at your reports, because everything looks uniform, but will also help prevent situations in which you accidentally, are tracking the same action, but with two different event names, right? So this particularly becomes a problem when you start implementing Mixpanel maybe across different platforms, right? So maybe you have a iOS app and an Android app and a web app, right? And they all send data to the same one project. If your iOS app calls that sign up page view, but let's say your Android app calls that, sign up, or even something as simple as sign up lowercase page, lowercase view, these would actually be treated as completely separate events because Mixpanel is case sensitive and also space sensitive too. So if I deleted spaces, it will treat these as different events. So you really want to make sure that you have a consistent naming mechanism when you are setting your event names and also your property names, which we'll be looking at a bit later. So here you can see I'm sticking with a consistent formatting structure for all my event names. So let's go ahead and save that and quickly check to make sure that these new events that we've tracked are working as expected. All right, so I'm going to jump back into our Music Finder app, and let's go ahead and start triggering some more events. Right, so let's sign up as a new user. So let's say Michael Scott, his email, and let's say Michael likes listening to. He's a big reggae fan. All right, so Michael signs up, so that hopefully should trigger the sign up event. Let's have him play a song. We should trigger a song play event. And finally, let's have him buy a song to trigger the song purchase event. Now, again, jumping back into our Mixpanel project here, Live View should populate these new events if everything is working as expected. And there we go. We have these sign up page views, followed by a sign-up event, then a song play, and a song purchase. And every single one of these events will have the default properties because we are tracking it with the JavaScript library, right? So I can see, for example, that this song play was performed in the Chrome browser. Now, while these default properties are great, a lot of times they don't really give us the complete picture of what just happened, right? So look at the song play event, for example. Nowhere here can I tell what specific song was played, right? There's no song title property, there's no artist, there's no genre. But as you can imagine, these are all very important bits of detail that we're going to want to track, right? Because let's say I want to do something as simple as, hey, Mixpanel, show me all song plays broken up by artist, right? I want to see what artists are popular in Music Finder. Unless we're tracking these properties, there's no way for me to run that report. So somehow we're going to need to add our own custom properties to send along with these default properties, right? So that is fortunately something that Mixpanel can handle, right? So all we have to do is after we make our track call, within our track call, we're going to pass in a second parameter. So not just the event name, but we're going to add a second parameter, which is going to be a object. So it's going to be a JavaScript object. So I'm going to open up some curly braces. And inside of this object is just going to be key value pairs for each one of the properties that we want to set. So the key in this case is just going to be the name that we want for the specific property. All right, so let's say I want to set a property called song title. And then I would do a colon. And then here's where I specify the actual property value that I want to set with this property, right? Now in this case, I'm just going to use these variables that are being passed into my song played function because these will contain the dynamic values for the specific song that was just played. Right? So in this case, the song title is whatever string is stored inside of this title variable. Right? And similarly, let's go ahead and track an event add a event property called, let's do artist. Again, I'm just going to use this artist variable right here. And finally, let's add one for genre. And I'm just use this genre property here. And you can imagine that these properties are also going to be useful for our song purchase event. So let's go ahead and copy these properties over into our song purchase event as well. All right, so we've updated our track call. Let's go ahead and see if this actually now works. Right, so here in Music Finder, I'm going to just refresh the page. So we have our updated track call. And let me just check just to be sure. So I'm going to view the page source. I'm going to look at my Mixpanel JavaScript file. And yeah, looks like this is the updated track call, right? So it has song title, artist, and genre. Now let's see if it works, right? So I'm going to go ahead and inside of Music Finder now, play a song. So let's say I want to play High Tide or Low Tide by Bob Marley, right? So I'm going to click the play button, which, going back to our live view, should hopefully trigger a new song play event. And when I refresh, there we go. A song was played 9 seconds ago. Now the moment of truth, if I click on that, I should be able to see, there we go. This was sure enough High Tide or Low Tide by Bob Marley, and the genre was reggae. Right? So these custom properties that we added are now being sent with every song play event, as well as song purchase. Right? So if I purchase, let's say, Your House by Steel Pulse, same thing. Here in live view, we should now get a song purchase event, which should have our custom properties. Sometimes there is a little bit of a delay, so let's see. Oh, maybe I didn't update let me try refreshing. Okay, so now that I've refreshed, let's try buying Your House by Steel Pulse. Checking live view. Song play. There we go. Yeah, song purchase 8 seconds ago. When I click on it, oops, sorry about that. Under Your Properties, we can see that this was sure enough Your House by Steel Pulse. So now we have our own custom properties being tracked with events as well. All right, let's see what is next. So we've tracked events, we've added custom properties. What to talk about next? Let's go back to our here. All right, so I guess we're on to identity management, right? So we've covered event tracking. Identity management, this is a big one. So definitely pay attention. If you're falling asleep, I want you to wake up, because identity management is probably the one topic that developers struggle with the most when it comes to Mixpanel implementation. Right? So I want to make sure that we clearly cover identity management in this webinar. I will probably do actually a follow-up webinar where I'll do more of a deep dive into identity management. But for now, we should cover enough to hopefully get you kind of understanding what exactly identity management is and how you should be using it. So let's go ahead and, so here in live view, let's look at this column right here. So you'll notice that every single event that we've sent so far has this property, so it's an event property called distinct ID, right? And it just looks kind of like a random hash. Now what this distinct ID is the event property that Mixpanel uses to determine what specific user performed that event, right? So for example, if I go into my insights report and say, let's say I want to know how many users have played, a song within Music Finder, right? As of now, we know it's just been one user, right? So the answer should be 1. So here I go into insights. I say, show me song plays in the last 96 hours. Looks like 2 songs were played, but I want to know the unique number of users, right? I don't care about how many total songs they played. I just want to see how many users have played songs. So when I switch over to unique, all of a sudden we see that number drops to 1, right? So how did Mixpanel know that, these 2 separate song plays that we see here, so this song play and this song play, how did it know that those 2 actions were performed by the same one user, right? That all comes down to the distinct ID, right? So really what Mixpanel is doing when it performs a unique analysis is it's looking at the unique number of distinct IDs that perform that event, right? So now the question is, where is this distinct ID coming from, right? So it's great that we can see that this one user is, has a consistent distinct ID all along, but how is this value being set, right? Because that's really understanding where this distinct ID comes from is really essential to truly understanding how Mixpanel deals with identity management. So to answer that question, let's jump back into Music Finder, right? And you'll notice that, where am I? Here we go, in Music Finder. You'll notice that when I install the JavaScript library, the Mixpanel JavaScript library, that library will automatically create a cookie for that website. So a Mixpanel cookie. So if I were to search now for cookies for Music Finder, we can see I have one cookie here in my browser, and it is a cookie that was set by Mixpanel, right? And if we were to actually look into this cookie, we're going to see that there's a value stored in here called distinct ID, right? And if I were to check this distinct ID value that we see right here, so it starts in 2216, and jump back here. Oh, actually, wait, no, that's not the value. So let's look at distinct ID here. I think it actually might be in, I think it might be encoded somehow. But here you can see that we are in fact storing a value called distinct ID within a browser cookie, right? Now, so what's happening here is when Mixpanel is tracking an event, right? So in our code, when we're doing a Mixpanel.track call, automatically the Mixpanel JavaScript library is looking into our browser cookie and pulling this distinct ID value, right? So it's finding this distinct ID value right here. Oh, here we go. That's where it starts. So 1651C, back here, again, 1651C. So you can see that the value here in this cookie is what's being passed in as our distinct ID for our events. So every time we have a track call, again, Mixpanel is automatically pulling that distinct ID from the cookie and sending it, just like it's sending the other default properties, it's sending it with every single event, right? Now, the idea is that this cookie will now persist even across browser sessions, right? So if I were to, for example, let's say close out of Chrome, right? So I'm going to completely quit Chrome right now and reopen Chrome. And the same user now returns to Music Finder, right? So it goes back to dev.musicfinder.live and goes ahead and, let's say, logs in. And who is this? This was Michael at standardmifflin.com. Same user, but it's a different browser session. We hope that the distinct ID will still be the same, right? So let's go ahead and now play Chase the Devil by Max Romeo. Again, let's open up our Mixpanel live view. And we can hopefully see that, yep, there we go. The distinct ID still remain the same, right? So here was a song play that was from a different browser session, right? But because this cookie still exists in my browser, let me pull it up real quick, sorry. Music, sorry, one second. Oh, there we go, I need to search here. Music Finder, yeah. So because this cookie still exists, Mixpanel is able to persist that distinct ID. So that is where this random distinct ID is coming from. Now let's look at a more complicated use case, right? So let's say Michael decides to instead switch browsers, right? Maybe he's fed up with Chrome and says, hey, you know what? I want to switch to using Firefox, right? So he jumps on over to Firefox here, and in Firefox, he goes ahead and logs in, right? He's already got an account created, so he doesn't sign up for a new account. He just says, you know, hey, I'm Michael. I'm back to check out some new music. And once he logs in, let's say he plays this song right here. So he plays Johnny Too Bad by the Slickers. Now back here in live view, there we go. We can see this login event comes in, and if we refresh, I'm sure the song play event should come in too. Yeah, oops, let's give it one more second. Come on. Maybe that was cached. Let me try refreshing this page. Okay, and now play the song. That's another good tip. As you're working on implementation as a developer, undoubtedly you're going to run into this issue where you're revisiting the same pages, but you've since added tracking call. Make sure you always do a hard refresh so that you're not looking at an old cached version that does not have your updated tracking call. So now, there we go. Now that I've refreshed it and triggered the event, we can now see the song play come in. So our events are still tracking, and we still have all those default properties. But look what happened to our distinct ID, right? It looks the same at the start, but look at this. So this is 1651C308, whereas back here was 1651C1836. So it was a different... looks like our distinct ID changed as soon as we switch browsers, right? And rather than looking at the distinct ID, you can actually kind of see that by looking here at these icons. So you'll notice that the user icon has actually switched colors, right? So this is kind of live view's hint at letting you know that, hey, this is a different user. Now we can kind of make sense of this because we now know where this distinct ID is coming from, right? So it's being stored within a browser cookie, which you likely know that browser cookies are specific to a particular browser, right? So as soon as that user switches to a different browser, they're going to have a completely different Mixpanel cookie, which is going to be assigned a different distinct ID. Now this, of course, is going to be a problem for us, right? Because let's say, again, going back here into Insights, I want to know how many users have played a song within Music Finder, right? We know that the answer should be 1, right? The only user we have so far is Michael. Yet when I go here and do that same report as before, right? So I'm going to look at song plays. Total is 5, but I want to look at unique number of song plays. We now see 2, right? Because again, Mixpanel is the only way Mixpanel deals with unique analysis is by looking at the unique ID. So really it's just saying that, of all these song play events, how many unique distinct IDs are there? And it finds one right here, and it finds another one right here. So it thinks that 2 different users have performed this event. This is why identity management is so important, right? Because if you don't do things correctly, it's going to skew your reports, right? So it's going to make your reporting possibly inaccurate, especially if you're doing unique analyses, right? So let's look at how we can fix this problem, right? So ideally, rather than relying on Mixpanel's kind of random ID that's assigned per cookie, it'd be nice if we can just tell Mixpanel to identify the user in the same way that Music Finder is identifying the user, right? So how did we know that, this was Michael over here in Firefox, right? Versus, you can see it's showing him the same songs, right? Because it's the same user. The way Music Finder knew is that Michael went through the login process, right? He went ahead and logged in and identified himself by his email address, right? So we want to do the same thing in Mixpanel. We want to say, hey, don't identify the user based off of this random distinct ID, but let's identify the user based off their email. So that even if they move around from browser to browser or even device to device, right? Because as soon as a user switches to a new device, again, that cookie will not be there, right? They're going to have a brand new cookie with a new distinct ID. So we want something that will actually follow that user around. And we know that the email address will remain constant for that user even as they move around. So let's go ahead and tell Mixpanel to identify our users by email, right? Now the function for doing that is literally identify, right? So we're going to go here and say, hey, as soon as a user creates their account, tell Mixpanel to identify this user, right? So in other words, don't identify them by that random ID, but identify them now by whatever whatever value we pass in here to this identify function, right? Now, it's up to you what you use to identify your users, so long as it is a value that is unique for each user, right? So you don't want to use something like name to identify your users, because what if another user named Michael Scott signs up for Music Finder with a different email address? We don't want Mixpanel to identify those 2 different users as the same one user, right? So you always want to use a value that is unique. So in our case, we know our users have unique email addresses because that's how they sign up. So I'm going to go ahead and use that to identify our users. Now, when does a user identify themselves? Not only on account creation, but they also identify themselves when they log in. So same thing here. When a user logs in, I want to go ahead and tell Mixpanel to identify that user based off of their email address. So let's go ahead and save this and see this in action. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and log out and refresh our page. So now here, so let's say I go to the login page. I say, hey, Mixpanel. And actually, before we do that, I want to show you one other cool tip for developers for as you're setting up your Mixpanel implementation, which is if you open up the console within your browser, you can actually use a bunch of cool, let me clear this all out. Oops. Is that not clear? Oh, never mind. Okay. Sorry about that. You can use a bunch of cool Mixpanel functions, one of which is mixpanel.getDistinctID. And essentially what this will do is it will pull the distinct ID from the Mixpanel cookie and display it to your console. So here we can see that right now, this user has a distinct ID of 165C. This is the same one that we saw in our live view, right? Now let's see what happens when we log in, right? Because when we log in, we're going to be calling the identify function, which like we said, should override this random ID and instead start using email address as the distinct ID. So let's see that happen, right? So I'm going to go ahead and log in as Michael at dm.com. And let's see this work, hopefully. All right, so Michael has now logged in. And here I'm going to go ahead and now check the distinct ID. So again, I'm going to type in mixpanel.distinctID. And there you go. We can now see the distinct ID has been changed to actually just read Michael dm.com. So this has actually changed the value that is stored within that local cookie. Now what this means is that now when we play play a song or purchase a song, it will be sent with the email address as the distinct ID. So if I go back here into live view, we should now see 2 new events here. There we go. We see a login, song play, and song purchase, all with a distinct ID of Michael at DM. Now why this is so important is that now Michael can go ahead and open up, let's say, Firefox. So here we are in Firefox. And log in over here, let's say Michael at dm.com. And once he's logged in here, again, he should be able to play songs and purchase songs. And ideally, Mixpanel will view this all as the same one user. Right? So even though he jumped browsers, we should still be identifying this user as, yep, there we go. So here we can see all these events are sent with the same distinct ID, even though the user switched from, so if we zoom in here on browser, we can see they switched from from Chrome over to Firefox. So we've now solved that problem that we saw here. Right? So we're tracking the same user across different devices. Great, so that is working as expected. Let's go ahead and, a lot of times when we're in implementation mode, we want to run through a user flow as if we were a brand new user. Right? So I want to actually clear out this cookie entirely. Now, one way, of course, is I can just go ahead into my browser and clear the cookies. Mixpanel has actually made this easy for you as well by, just like I showed you, there was that mixpanel.getDistinctID function you can use in the console. There's another cool little function I want to show you real quick, which is if you open up your console, you can type in mixpanel.reset. And what this will do is it will literally reset the Mixpanel cookie as if it is a brand new user. Right? So when I do mixpanel.reset, now when I check the Mixpanel, let's say get distinct ID, we should see a brand new distinct ID. Right? So here's a completely new distinct ID. Right? So just like that, I've now kind of pretended like I'm a new user on Music Finder in the eyes of Mixpanel. Right? So now I can run through this flow one more time just to make sure everything's working. Right? So let's go ahead and have a user sign up. So again, new user comes to the site. They go ahead and sign up. So let's say this is Dwight. And he signs up with his email, dwight@dm.com. And Dwight loves folk music. All right, so he signs up. Let's say plays a song, buys a song, and then switches over to Firefox. So let's test that as well. So going back here into Firefox. Again, I'm going to go ahead and reset. I want to reset the Mixpanel cookie here as if it's a brand new user. So let's go ahead and open our console. And let's do a Mixpanel. And just let's actually see what the value is now. Before we reset, mixpanel.getDistinctID. We can see that right now, yep, it's still showing Michael at DM, right? Because that was we called identify, which actually changed the value in our the value in our cookie. But you'll see that as soon as I call mixpanel.reset and check the distinct ID, there you go. We now have a brand new random distinct ID. So in the eyes of Mixpanel, we are a new user that just landed to Music Finder for the first time. So let's go ahead and have Dwight, go ahead and log in. So now he's Dwight at dm.com. And once we log in, again, we call identify, which means that the distinct ID should be changed to Dwight at dm.com. And then when we play this song, it should be sent with that distinct ID. So let's check, make sure that's all working. Let's refresh our page. Saw a couple, oops, let's ignore that, shoot. Let's go ahead and refresh. I think that banner was for a temporary delay, which would explain why we don't see those events coming in yet. Oh, no, here. So we have the login at least. Let's give it another second. Let's see if this works. Temporary data delay, real-time updates to event analytics reports. Okay. So this might explain why we're seeing a bit of a delay. All right, let's hope this works fairly soon. Let's try one more refresh. If not, we'll pause. All right, let's go ahead and actually take a quick break. So we're going to pause and resume once this issue is resolved. All right, everyone. Sorry about that. Looks like things are back and running, though, so we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and just redo that example again. So here, back in Music Finder, I'm going to Music Finder in Chrome. I'm going to go ahead and reset our cookie, so as if we are a first-time user. So mixpanel.reset. And I'll do the same thing here in Firefox real quick. So let's go ahead and inspect. Switch over to our console, mixpanel.reset. All right, so we're back to a fresh start. And what we're going to do is, again, we want to make sure that our distinct ID is being tracked as expected, right? So when a user signs up, we should then set their distinct ID to their email address. So in this case, let's pick a new user. So let's say Pam Beasley signs up. And Pam loves, let's say, classical music. At that point, we should have a distinct ID of Pam. And let's actually just go ahead and, for the sake of time, rather than inspecting the cookie, we'll see the distinct ID in live view. All right, so I'm going to play a song, buy a song, and then check live view. All right, so we should see, if we refresh, hopefully events are back to coming in. Yep, there we go. Sign up event, song play, and song purchase, all with an ID of Pam. And of course, when Pam switches over to Firefox, when she logs in, before she logs in, she's going to have a random distinct ID. So if I go here and type in get distinct ID, we see that right now she has the Mixpanel generated distinct ID, whereas once she signs up as pam@dm.com, that will then get sent as her distinct ID, which again we see here in the console, which is what gets sent with the events that she performs. So back here, quick refresh. And here we go. Yeah, so we got all of Pam's events, cross browsers, being sent with the same distinct ID, except for one event, right? And that is this one right here. So take a look at our sign up page view event, right? So in this case, we can see that it was sent with the random Mixpanel issue distinct ID, right? Because if you think about it, when Pam first viewed the sign up page, we had no idea that was Pam, right? She had yet to sign up, and therefore we could not, identify who this user was. So the best thing Mixpanel could do was send this event with the distinct ID that was stored in the cookie at that time. Now, of course, once Pam signed up, then we had no problem, right? Then we were able to identify her, and when she logged in, same thing. We identified her, and all the events were tracked as Pam. But what about this one event? Right? Now, you may be thinking, so what? We lost, one event. It's not that important. But oftentimes, this is a very important event for our users, right? They want to track, how many users viewed the sign-up page and then went on to actually sign up, right? So let's say you want to run a basic two-step funnel, right, to see your sign-up page's conversion rate. You could look at how many users viewed the sign-up page and then went on to sign up. And for our analysis, let's go ahead and filter this down to just look at Pam. So I'm going to add a filter and say, how many people viewed the sign-up page? Let's see, how can I do this? Oh, I haven't done that yet. Well, you get the point. Let's go back here. Here you can see we do have users falling off, right? Now, if we look at our live view, we can see why, right? So the way the funnels report is working is, again, it's looking at distinct IDs to indicate individual users. So it's first looking at how many distinct IDs performed the sign-up page view event. So here we have one distinct ID, and here we have another distinct ID that viewed the sign-up page, and finally we have this distinct ID, right? Now, of those distinct IDs, how many of them then went on to perform the sign-up event, right? Here with this first distinct ID, it did in fact come back and perform the sign-up event, right? Because that was before we ever used identify to change distinct IDs, right? So that's the one conversion that we see here in the funnel, right? But these other ones, let's ignore this one here because that was the one when our events weren't sending as expected. So let's now look at Pam, right? So here, this user came in and performed the sign-up page view event, but in the eyes of Mixpanel, that user never returned to perform any other events, right? Let alone the sign-up event, right? So that is why our funnel is broken, right? Because it's looking at the distinct ID and it's seeing that that distinct ID did not return to perform the sign-up event. Instead, it looks like a different user named Pam@dm.com returned and did a sign-up event, right? So we need to make sure that even our pre-sign-up events are sent with the same distinct ID as our post-sign-up events. Now this gets a bit tricky because unfortunately we can't just go ahead and update this after it's been sent, right? Ideally we would just say, hey, by the way, this sign-up page view event, change it to be pam@dm.com. But the way Mixpanel works in terms of event data is once an event is sent to Mixpanel, it is immutable, right? So you can't change anything about this event once it's been sent. So instead, what we want to do is once we do eventually go on to identify Pam using her email, we essentially want to map this distinct ID with her original distinct ID, right? So this is not changing. So we know that all events from Pam need to be sent with this distinct ID because that was the first ID that was ever sent for Pam, right? Now, again, we don't want to worry about passing along this random value. Her email address is what follows her as she moves from device to device, right? So what we want to say is anytime a user is identified as pam@dm.com, I want those events to be recorded with this distinct ID, right? So this process that I'm referring to is what we call an alias, right? We're saying I want Pam to act as an alias for 1651C, blah, 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 right? So the way we set up an alias is just like we set up an identify call. Instead, I'm going to say, hey, when the user first signs up, I want you to take their email address and create an alias in Mixpanel, right? And what this function will do now is going to point whatever email or whatever value you provide as the alias and point it to whatever distinct ID is currently in that cookie at that time, right? Which is going to be that random distinct ID, right? So again, this is a lot easier once we actually see it in action. So let's go ahead and save this. So again, all I'm doing now is I'm aliasing on account creation, and then I'm still using identify when the user logs in, and we'll see exactly why in a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and run through one final demo here. So I'm going to log out, and again, just reset my cookie. So let's go to console and do a mixpanel.reset. Okay, so at this point in time, the distinct ID is going to be some random Mixpanel distinct ID. All right. Now, the user goes ahead and signs up. All right, so let's pick a new user. Let's say Jim. Jim's email. Let's quickly do this. Let's say Jim likes rock. Now, when we sign up, right, that's going to trigger this call right here. So it's going to create an alias which maps Jim@dm.com to this distinct ID, which is currently in our cookie, right? And that's all it does. It just creates this mapping. It doesn't even change the distinct ID in our cookie. So unlike identify, which actually overwrote this value, we're going to see that as soon as Jim signs up, if we check the distinct ID here, it's still the same value as before, right? But now on Mixpanel's end, Mixpanel is keeping track of the fact that Jim, at dm.com really points to this value right here, right? So if we ever later go on to identify a user as Jim and set Jim to the distinct ID, once that event arrives in Mixpanel, Mixpanel will go ahead and translate it to this random distinct ID that Jim was initially issued. So let's go ahead and see this, right? So here, let me clear this out. Actually, let me just close this console. So now here's Jim in Chrome. Let's say plays a song and buys a song. Again, in live view, these should all be coming in as one viewer. So far this is great, right? We have the sign up page view and all subsequent events being tracked with that same one random distinct ID, right? That was originally set to that cookie. Now, here's the tricky part. Let's say we switch over to Firefox. And again, we're going to start from scratch. Let's reset this cookie here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our console and do a quick mixpanel.reset. There we go. Okay. What's the distinct ID right now? Some other random distinct ID, right? So this is a completely different distinct ID. But we're going to see, of course, as soon as Jim goes ahead and logs in, right, so here's Jim at dm.com. We, at this point, call the identify function, right? Which means it's actually going to change the distinct ID locally within the cookie, right? So here in Firefox, if I now say, hey, what's the distinct ID? We now see Jim, right? So when he plays, let's say, whipping post right here, that will be sent to Mixpanel with this distinct ID. However, once it arrives at Mixpanel, Mixpanel knows to translate this distinct ID, which is an alias, back to the original distinct ID. So if we switch back into, let's go back here into our live view and refresh, hopefully it's there. Beautiful, there we go. So here we can see this login and song play, which was performed in Firefox, is still being tracked with the original distinct ID. All right, so even though it was sent with jim@dm.com as the distinct ID, by the time it actually shows up in our Mixpanel project, it has been translated from the alias over to the actual distinct ID value. All right, so the end result is we're now tracking a user from pre-sign up as well as post-sign up and across different across different browsers, all using the same distinct ID. All right, so with that, we've successfully implemented proper identity management. All right, I know that was a lot. Don't worry, the last section on user profiles is going to be a lot quicker. And actually, before we move on to that, one quick final note on identity management. That right there was actually a rather quick demo for identity management, right? We can get into a lot more detail and get in depth, and I'll actually do another webinar session on strictly identity management. But for now, the one key thing I want to highlight is that best practice is to, again, alias on sign up and identify on login, right? So the idea is you should only alias once, right? And that should happen when the user signs up. And then every single time the user logs in, you identify them based off of whatever value you want. So their email address or user ID or whatever distinct value you use to identify your users. All right, let's go ahead and look at the final topic, which will be user profiles. So you'll notice going back here into our project, if I were to switch over to our users section and click on the Explore report, it's still telling me, hey, we don't have any data, right? So it's suggesting that there's no profiles in my Mixpanel project. Now, when I go and click on the Setup Now button, we see that this first step is exactly what we've already done, right? We've already installed the Mixpanel library, and we just went ahead and identified our users, right? So that was all the identity management stuff we just did. The only remaining step that we've yet to do is to actually set our properties for our users. So until we actually go ahead and call mixpanel.people.set, Mixpanel is not going to automatically create profiles for us, right? So what we want to do is we want to call this function, and when we want to do it is up to us, right? So when do we want Mixpanel to create a profile for our users? In our case, it would probably make sense to do it, when the user signs up for an account, right? So when they create a Music Finder account, we'll go ahead and tell Mixpanel to mixpanel.people.set, and you can see that inside of here we just pass in whatever people properties we want to set. So just like events had event properties where we specified the property name and then the value, we're doing exactly the same thing here, but for properties that describe the user, right? So let's say we want to set a property called, for example, I want to keep track of their email, right? And that value is just going to be whatever is stored in the email. Let's keep track of the user's name. So that name is whatever is collected here in the name variable. And finally, let's keep track of their favorite genre, which will be whatever is stored here in the genre variable. Right? Now you'll notice before we test this out, back here in the instructions, you'll notice the email property that they're showing here in the example has a $sign in front of it. Right? Now the reason why is because email and actually name as well, so name, which we're about to update to, are what we call special properties. Right, so if we click on this link here, we're taken to a help article or one of our dev docs, which explains what special properties are and the specific special properties that Mixpanel expects. And essentially, long story short, a special property is just a property that Mixpanel does something special with, right? Hence the name. So for example, when you set a $sign email, that is the value that Mixpanel will look for when you're trying to target users for email notifications. All right, so Mixpanel is going to look at their profile and say, send it to the address that's stored as $sign email. So you definitely want to make sure that you're using the correct name when you're setting special properties. So in our case, let's go ahead and update this to be email. And properties, just like event names, are case sensitive. So you want to make sure you do lowercase as well. So let's go ahead and set email and name and save that. And we'll run one final test and we should be all done after that. So let's go ahead and test out whether our profiles are being created. So again, back here in Music Finder. Sorry, I know this is getting a bit repetitive, but let's just do this one last time. So I'm going to go ahead and reset. So I'm going to go here and do a Mixpanel.reset. All right, so brand new user comes to Music Finder. They go ahead and click on the sign up button. When that user signs up, let's do a new user. So let's do, how about Creed? Creed signs up. And as soon as he signs up, let's say Creed loves hip hop. Yeah, so as soon as Creed signs up, we're going to be calling not only this track call to track that event, as well as the alias to set up the mapping between his email and his current distinct ID. But now we're going to be calling this people set call, which should actually create a profile with us with these properties. All right, so here, let's test that out. Creed signs up. And let's go ahead and have Creed, why not? He plays a song and he buys a song. Now, moment of truth. Back here in our Mixpanel project, just like we saw with our events, we can click on this button here to check to see if our events are being sent. And there you go. Great, we've received user profiles from you. So it looks like this worked. If we want to actually view that data, let's jump back into our Explore report. And hopefully, there you go. We now see a profile for Creed. And clicking into that profile, we can see all of his data, right? So it aggregates the events that were sent by that user. So we can see, view the sign up page a couple times, then signed up, then played a song, then purchased a song. We can also see the properties we set, right? So here we have email. You'll notice in the UI, it shows up as email. So it looks nice in the UI, but if you were to click on the property name, we can see that it's actually being stored as $email, which is our special property. So we've got email, we've got name, but we also have a whole bunch of other information, right? So this is exactly like events where we had default event properties. You can see here we also have default people properties, which you can also find in that help article that I pointed to earlier. So we got default properties, we've got the properties we set, and with that, we've now completed our implementation, right? So we're now tracking events, not just anonymously, but we're tracking them to specific users, right? So we're keeping track of a user cross-device and cross-browser sessions, cross everything. The same events from the same user are being tracked as under one distinct ID, and we have Mixpanel tracking profiles for us. So we can now leverage features such as campaigns and messaging and the other people functionality of Mixpanel. Ooh, all right, I know that was a lot, but hopefully seeing a full implementation from scratch will help you once you go on to actually implement it into your own product, right? So definitely review this webinar. I'll send out a recording so you can see the entire implementation again on your own time. But for now, I think we are all set. So without further ado, let's go ahead and we can jump into the Q&A session. I know we ran a bit over on time, so feel free to jump out at any point if you do need to head elsewhere. But if not, I'll go ahead and start answering questions from the audience. So please just go ahead and add your questions, if you have any, into the chat box, and I'll go ahead and start answering those shortly.